All right, y'all. DT2 Comics Chat here for another episode of the Rant Room. And this time I'm ranting on the Ahsoka series. If you notice the title of this video, it says The End for Me. Okay? Now, let me tell you the specific issues that we're going to talk about that signify, at least for me, why I'm done with Star Wars, and never thought I'd say that and never thought I'd get to that point, and always inwardly hoped that I wouldn't. Okay, but now it's too much, too late. So the Ahsoka series is the pinnacle of everything that's wrong with modern Star Wars. And I know, that there's always people that love it and are going to praise it no matter what they're given or whatever, but I ain't one of those people. So if you follow me at all, I'm gonna call it like I see it every time. Okay. And the Ahsoka series is the summation of every single thing that's wrong with current Star Wars, every single reason that the fan base is divided, every single reason that their numbers are dwindling, because the viewership is dwindling with each series and the stock price has gone down a little bit, and they're trying to wonder, what happened or what to do or whatever. But everything, every answer that they need to find about what the issues are can be found in Ahsoka. Okay? So we're going to cover that today in this rant room. First off, first point, it's inaccessible. What do I mean by it's inaccessible? I mean, you had to have seen all the seasons of Clone Wars, and you had to have seen all the seasons of Rebels, and you need to have seen Ahsoka's appearances in The Mandalorian to have any kind of idea of what's going on. Okay? One of the very last lines that Thrawn has in the finale is that, where Ahsoka is would be fitting for a Ronin like herself. You need to understand how Ahsoka became a Ronin Jedi, a masterless samurai, a masterless Jedi, how that happened, especially if her master was Anakin Skywalker himself. Okay? And to understand that, along with the other relationships with Sabine and Ezra and everything else that's going on, and Thrawn, and you need to have watched all of the Clone Wars and all of the Rebel scenes and her Mando appearances. Otherwise, the emotional moments in this series have no weight. They don't land. Have you ever told the joke and it didn't land and you thought it was so funny and people just kind of cocked their head and looked at you? Then that's why every time you have those moments where you can tell by the music and the way the camera is lingering and a whole bunch of stuff that it's supposed to be a moment. But if you don't understand the background of all the characters, there is absolutely no way you will be able to tap into whatever type of emotional weight was supposed to be conveyed in that moment. It's inaccessible if you haven't seen all the other episodes. And so if you just know Star Wars from the movies, whether you watched, just the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy or the sequel trilogy, if you watch, 3 movies, 6 movies, 9 movies, whatever. If that's all you know of Star Wars, you will have no idea what's going on here. You'll recognize some of the tech, like droids and lightsabers, but you're not going to understand what's going on between the characters. I mean, like not even a little bit. And there's nothing in the series that takes the time to explain for newbies the background of what's really going on. So problem number 1, it's inaccessible. Here come problem number 2. It's lethargic. Lord have mercy. Rosario Dawson, nothing against her as an actress. Most of the things I've seen her in, I really liked her in. So I know she's got acting skills, but she looked like she's sleepwalking. She looked like she drugged out on something. She looked like she high or she on shrooms or something. It's just so, her performance from start to finish is so lethargic. She smiles like maybe 2 times and shows a little bit of emotion. So I don't know what the direction was. I don't know what they were going for, but whatever it was they were going for, they didn't make it, especially when you understand the type of character Ahsoka Tano really is. She's bubbly, she's energetic, she's overzealous, she's impatient, she's a lot like Anakin. And here, you would have no clue that this was even the same character. And not only is she lethargic in her performance, but the pacing and the direction and the editing, the flow of each episode is so slow. It's so lethargic. It's sleep-inducing. Long gazing shots with, long people having no expression on their face, trying to convey some emotion, I guess, with no expression or whatever. And it's just so lethargic. Lord have mercy. It's just like it's moving through molasses. It's like trying to run through mud. It's just like, would you say something? Would you get somewhere? Would you have, even any peak moments? And it has a few, but then it goes right back to that slow turtle pace. Problem number 2. It also has the slowest lightsaber fights, except for maybe the very first one that we see in A New Hope when Obi-Wan confronts Vader in the hallway. That one was relatively slow based on what we got to see later and what we got used to. But I mean, that was back then when they had the technology and the training at that level in the late 70s. We've seen a lot more since then. But the lightsaber fights in this one, especially the last one in the finale between Ahsoka and Morgan, it's painfully, humiliatingly slow. And they should have been dead multiple times. And Ahsoka Tano has demonstrated much greater speed in the past, and we don't know what's going on with her. It's just, it's embarrassingly slow. So it's lethargic. Here comes problem number 3. It's canon destroying. What do I mean it's canon destroying? We all saw what happened with The Last Jedi because Rian Johnson's purpose and point was to divide the fan base. His purpose, because he's got that famous video where he said he wanted people to leave theaters when they watch one of his movies, scratching their heads, angry, confused, some people loving it, some people saying, what did I just watch, that kind of thing. He stated explicitly that his goal as a filmmaker was to be divisive. So they put The Last Jedi in his hands, and so mission accomplished. But here in the Ahsoka series, it's even more canon destroying. No more so than with The Force. Because we've been arguing about this and people have been talking about how George Lucas was quoted as saying that, anybody can use the Force and we all have the Force, blah, 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 blah. But the movies don't support that because in the first trilogy, it's all about character and it's all about your natural Force sensitivity. And it's much more of a spiritual thing. Then in the prequel trilogy, he introduces midichlorians. And then now it becomes more of a scientific thing. But now, in Ahsoka, with Sabine's whole arc, it was like, well, anybody can use the Force, and you can go from having no Force sensitivity, no Force powers, no Force awareness, to doing all the things that she did. We'll get into detail of that in a minute. Lightsabers. How do lightsabers even work? If you go back to the Phantom Menace, when they're trying to come through those blast doors, you see Qui-Gon turning up the concentration. Because if you didn't know that about lightsabers, you can change the length of the blade, and you can also change the intensity of the blade, if you didn't know that. So he changes the intensity and the length of his blade, and he cuts through those metal doors. And that metal is melting under the power of that lightsaber, right? Well, here, just like they did with Obi-Wan, Reba got stabbed in the sternum twice, and she survived. And here Sabine gets run through, although it is to the side. And she spends maybe like 2 hours in the hospital, and she's fine. But then again, in the final battle, they have Ahsoka kill Morgan with 2 horizontal swipes with her sword and a lightsaber. And so it's like, if you can survive being run through by a lightsaber, that kind of negates the danger of lightsabers, and that kind of negates the kinds of things that they can do. So they need to kind of make up their mind as to how it works. And if it is based on what I said, tuning the saber, then we need to see that every time, like the way they tune phasers in Star Trek. Because phasers have stun, and then they have hurt you really bad, and then they have disintegrate, where they just take you out. They have to key that in on a phaser for it to happen. It's not automatic. If that's the way lightsabers work, we need to see that every time the length and the intensity of the blade changes. Otherwise, We have no idea. But Sabine still got run through. She got a hole in her body from the lightsaber and just came right back. Like, you know, it was a scratch or a bruise or a scrape she got when she fell down or something. Okay, C-3PO showing up here. And also, he was so unlikable. I can't explain what it was about the energy of 3PO in this series, but this series had the effect of making you hate characters that you once liked. And I've heard many people say that they liked Sabine before, and this was not real Sabine, and they hate this version of Sabine. I definitely hate Sabine, but I didn't watch the other stuff, so I wasn't coming in with any kind of expectations, but I just don't like who she is as a character, all across the board. But this has had the impact of making you dislike characters that you loved. And I said in another review that Rosario Dawson's performance as Ahsoka in this series is so disconnected from the Ahsoka that we met, the real Ahsoka, if you will, until I see them as two separate characters. You have to work really hard as an actor to take a character that's already been portrayed, that you portrayed before, and do it so poorly until it makes people disconnect in their minds. In this series, we have super hyperdrive, to where you've got one hyperdrive on a ship, and we know all about that, but now we got the hyperdrive ring, where you can attach 5 to 7 extra hyperdrives, and so now instead of going however you can go under hyperspeed or light speed, now you can go 5 times, 10 times faster, or 10 times the distance. That's not clear, because when they get to the galaxy that they're going to try to find Thrawn, that's like, what, 13 trillion miles away? I mean, they don't explain it, but if you've got that kind of technology, that changes everything. If you've got hyperdrive, that changes everything. Changes everything. If you can outfit your ship so you can create rings, whatever you need to do, even if you just boost a ship's potential by adding an extra drive, it changes everything if such a thing were possible. So why didn't anybody think about that or use that before? Okay. Canon destroying. Okay. Ahsoka's appearances between the prequel trilogy, episodes 2 and 3, is already a bit canon destroying because Anakin never mentions her in the main movies. But here we also have zombie troopers. Now, I know zombie troopers occurred before, so I know that's not new and unique here, but what a skill to have, what an out. If when your stormtroopers get killed, you can raise them from the dead. I know the Night Sisters did it, but if it can be done, then it's game changing. Think about what would have happened in Attack of the Clones if they had flown in the Night Sisters or anyone with that kind of power and got them dead stormtroopers back up. Just think about that. What would you do against an enemy that just keep on coming and keep on coming and keep on coming until you completely dismember it and you didn't kill it, it just can't move anymore? Think about that, okay? TIE fighters, the fastest, most nimble, most maneuverable type of ship in Star Wars canon, and they get taken out by a slow lumbering ship where they just don't fly out of the way. They just throw their hands up and boom, and they have plenty of time to veer off to the right or the left, up or down, whatever, because TIE fighters in particular are fast enough to do that. That's why they're so feared, because they're so hard to outrun and outmaneuver. And they just die with a lunky old cumbersome ship. Yeah, no, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Cajun saying they didn't explain. I was kind of lost there. That's right. So much that goes on here. They just don't explain. That's why it destroys canon. I'm tired of saying this, but canon matters. But I've come to understand a little bit better because, and I'll explain that later. But the truth of the matter is that it does matter. It's the thing that adds cohesion to your story. It's the thing that adds stakes to your story. So if you don't have canon, your story is not really going to make any difference, and it's going to be impossible to follow. Because if the rules keep changing, okay, then nothing has any meaning. That's why you have to have canon. That's why you have to have mythology. That's why you have to have a story Bible for every story that you tell. And that's why you have to have a character Bible. But that's something that real writers understand. For some reason I haven't figured out yet, People only get offended like in the arts and religion, maybe politics as well. But if you're in sports and you can't do something, that is what it is. If you can't clear the bar, if you can't return the ball, if you can't stick the landing, that kind of is what it is. You ever notice that? If you claim to be a plumber, but you can't fix a septic system and you don't know how to unclog a drain, if you can't do what you say you can do, that is what it is. You are no plumber and you don't deserve any money because you can't do the job. If you're a dentist and somebody needs a root canal, you can't go in there talking about how you feel. And you're just a dentistophobe if you don't let me do a root canal in your mouth. You're just a dentistophobe, really? No, what you want is someone that knows how to do a root canal, someone that has that DDS, that education, and someone that has experience that's done it before. That just is what it is. But when it comes to things like the creative arts, I've discovered that people get personally offended, and I don't understand why. But, not mine to figure out. I've just discovered that is true. So when you say there are different levels of writing, what I'm always trying to do as a writer is become better. Every time I write, I want to become better. And when I look at works when I first started writing and where I am now, I've grown. And I want to continue to grow because I understand that there's a difference in levels. There's some people that can't write at all, and then there's people that write at different levels. But when it comes to the creative arts, singing, dancing, writing, playing an instrument, acting, people take it personally and people lose their minds. I don't understand why. I do not understand why, but oh well, everybody can't write and everybody can't write at the same level. And people that have studied their craft, there are certain things in place inside of an actual writer as opposed to someone who's, not that developed as a writer, or they're a hack. They can't write at all. They're just pretending that they can. Because you can't do that in the Olympics. You can't pretend to do a floor exercise routine. You can't do that as a plumber. You can't pretend to install a toilet. You got to know what you're doing or get out. Okay? So I know I said that I've grown. I know that I said I'm better than I am now, but that's the point. I acknowledge that I wasn't always where I am now, and I made an effort to get better. That's what real writers do. Do you know how I know that? Because Aaron Sorkin, Stephen King, James Patterson all say the same thing. They said, when I started writing, I sucked. I kept writing until I didn't. Okay? So that's what I mean when I say I'm not entertaining any more arguments about canon and how it doesn't matter and it can be anything the story needs to be. No, it can't. You don't know what you're talking about. Okay? But for some reason, that's deeply offensive and, be offended. Okay, next reason Ahsoka is the epitome of everything that's wrong with modern Star Wars and why I'm done with it is that it's girl bossy. Okay, there's a difference between a female character or a strong female character and a girl boss. Strong female characters we've had plenty of. We love them. Like Leia. Who doesn't love Leia? We love Carrie Fisher and we love Leia. So that's why I don't understand why anybody ever listened to people that said sci-fi people or geek people or whatever don't like strong female characters. That's a lie. That's always been a lie. But a girl boss is a character that's more, doesn't have to earn the stripes or the props or the respect or the position. It's just given to her. Doesn't have to demonstrate why she is or is not worthy. Very snarky, very smarmy, demands respect, but doesn't give any. And the males are always nerfed to make her look better. That's the difference between a strong female character, Princess Leia, Sarah Connor, Ellen Ripley, which we love, and a girl boss. Different, okay? And so when you look at the male characters here, strongest male characters were Balin. Also, Balin was the most interesting character in the whole series, not Ahsoka. And Juan, the droid. Now, he didn't have an arc, but he did what he did. He's a droid. He was really interesting, really smart, really on point. He's a droid. And Balin was really good. But Ezra was so weak. Ezra was such a nothing burger. Everything about the first half of Sabine's arc was about him. And when they get together, it's just kind of meh. Okay, and his character isn't even consistent. I'll get to that in a minute. And Thrawn Right. Cage is saying at that point, it seems forced. That's right. Forced. That's right. That's the key word there, is that it's forced. It's not earned. What we saw happen to Ripley was the last survivor of the Nostromo in the first movie, Alien. In Aliens, she didn't want to have anything to do with it, and she made that clear, but she couldn't shake her dreams. She was having nightmares about being face hugged and chest bursted, and she couldn't get past it. So she figured maybe she went back and faced the source of that fear. It would help her overcome it. Remember, she was nervous all the way through, and you see Ripley's progression through the movie, especially once we introduce Newt. Newt gave Ripley a reason to live again, a reason to love again, and she leveled up because now she had a new daughter to replace the daughter that died when she was in hypersleep. See, Ripley earned them stripes. She earned them points. That's what I'm trying to say. Same arc with Sarah Connor, that kind of thing. And Leia developed a softer side while not losing any of her strength as a character. We saw Leia fall in love with Han. She fell in love with Luke too until she found out, well, that's my brother, so I need to love him that way. Don't get me started. But we saw Leia fall in love with Han. We saw Leia love her whole little makeshift family. And we saw her softer side come out. But Leia never lost an ounce of strength as a character. I mean, once again, how could you not love Princess Leia at any point in her journey? Whether she's snarky, whether she's leading, whether she's crying in Han's arms or Luke's arms, or whatever, how could you not love Leia? Padme, same thing. See what I'm saying? Those relationships were earned. Padme had to balance her responsibilities, first as a queen, then as a senator, with the fact that she was falling for Anakin and she knew she shouldn't be, but she did. And they got married and conceived a child, and she knew all that was wrong, but she had to deal. See, so Padme earned her development as a character, but the girl boss character just has it. There's no explanation. They just talk to any people any kind of way they want. Hera was so disrespectful. Everything that Hera did was disrespectful. You can say she's a rebel, but you can't have a military if your leaders are just going to go off and do what they want to do all the time. You can't have an organized anything, okay? And Sabine was the worst, but I'm going to get there in a minute. Lord have mercy on Sabine. Morgan did have a bit of an arc, but it was kind of not fair to her. The Night Sisters were kind of static, but they just kind of did what they did. I'll give them that. But Shin, who is Shin? Who is she besides Balin's apprentice? Who is she? Okay? But you're supposed to get all this stuff and you just show up and you just have it, or it gets forced on you or whatever. And the men are always nerfed. Like in the final fight, the way Ezra was nerfed so Sabine could save him. Unbelievable. Okay? So, girl bossy. Next point, it's self-referential. It's member berries. What does that mean? That means that new Star Wars content is not about telling new stories. It's about referencing previous Star Wars stories. Star Wars is now self-referential. It's not about developing a new thing. It's about pointing back to the old thing and say, remember? You like that, right? So you should watch this new thing because of the old thing. And the biggest example of that in the Ahsoka series was obviously Anakin, his presence, and the Clone Wars flashbacks and the Siege of Mandalore, going back to things that we really would have wanted to see, member berries, bringing Hayden Christensen back. And let me say, as a side note, I'm so glad that he has gotten to the point, and we as the audience have gotten to the point where we love him and we realize we love the character of Anakin as he played it, and we realize that Anakin is the face of Star Wars. Anakin Skywalker is the main character of Star Wars, not Luke, not Rey, not Leia. It's Anakin. Why that angers people is beyond me, but oh well. Okay. The original trilogy could be retitled the Redemption of Anakin Skywalker, because that's what it was. Okay. The prequel trilogy, or at least Revenge of the Sith, could be retitled Darth Vader Begins, because that's what it was. Anakin is the central character. And we have, because when Hayden first came out as Anakin, we gave him a lot of flack. Talked about his performances being wooden, and he got a lot of pushback off that prequel trilogy, and a lot of people did. But he has grown, and he has gotten some better direction because it wasn't really his fault. And we've seen him in enough context now, and now we love this man. And we love his portrayal of Anakin. Just as a side note, I'm glad he got there, because remember, Ahmed Best said he considered suicide because of the way we pushed back against Jar Jar. That wasn't his fault, because Jar Jar Binks is an awful character. And he's a caricature, and he's a stereotype, and he's racially insulting. Jar Jar Binks, not Ahmed Best. But he said he contemplated suicide from the way people reacted to that. So there was a lot of strong reaction, and don't get me started on Jake Lloyd, little Anakin. There was a lot of fan reaction against Phantom Menace. So I'm glad that Hayden has come to the point where we love him in this role. And he was at some convention recently, and he got such a standing ovation, it was so long, he started crying. He started crying. The love overwhelmed him. And I am so glad to see that, because I have enjoyed him even more in his later appearances in Kenobi, but particularly in Ahsoka. But that's my point. Ahsoka is not the most important or interesting character in her own show, because Star Wars is now self-referential. It's looking back at stuff that we loved before and said, remember that? Remember? And bringing that stuff to the forefront, because the story they're telling isn't interesting enough to keep our attention, so they have to flash back to the past. It's self-referential now, because I really enjoyed the live-action Clone Wars scenes, and Hayden really nailed Anakin's look from that time period, and I really enjoyed the Siege of Mandalore scenes, and I love that whole thing. Those are some of the strongest scenes in the series, and that's my point. The flashbacks, okay? Self-referential. Next is a bait and switch. Lord have mercy. How many times have we seen a situation where we have one character's name on the marquee, but when we watch the show, we find out it's actually about another character? That's a bait and switch. We got you to watch because we put this name on the marquee, but in actuality, once we get inside the show, that's what happened to Arrow. Arrow was supposed to be about Oliver Queen's adventure from that island to becoming the Green Arrow, because at first he was the Hood, and and he was the Green Hood, and he went through a bunch of changes. And Barry was always the Flash, but his costume changed every season to get us to his traditional costume with the yellow boots and all that. And so in the middle of Arrow, it became Felicity and Friends. It became about Felicity and her mom and that whole thing. And even Stephen Amell said, we had to make some changes to come back for the later season. Okay, because they did a bait and switch. It's supposed to be about this one, but it ends up being about that one. Now, that wasn't as much a bait and switch, I think, as it was about, shipping or whatever, maybe. But like Hawkeye being about Kate Bishop and about every other thing not being about the character on the marquee. That's a bait and switch. We hook you with one name, but we focus on another character. That's what I mean. Okay? So in this show, this was not Ahsoka's show, and this was not Ahsoka's arc, because I want to ask you a question. What did Ahsoka go from? Because when you have an arc, you go from something to something. And I know you want to say that she went to Ahsoka, the white, Ahsoka in the light costume. She went to the world between worlds. She had a visitation to death, but her character didn't change. What does she know afterwards that she didn't know before? What could she do in the Force afterwards that she couldn't do before? What could she do with her lightsaber skills afterwards that she couldn't do before? If you just step back and think about it, Ahsoka had no arc. She did not go from something to something. She was rather static all the way through. But Sabine went from somebody who couldn't move a coffee cup to somebody who has Jedi reflexes because she's dodging and stopping blaster bolts with her lightsaber. She's force pushing someone in midair up several feet. She's holding open doors, and she had no force sensitivity, and she didn't have any force sensitivity. But everything about the High Republic, everything about Rey Skywalker, everything about this era of Star Wars is anybody can be a Jedi. Anybody can use the Force. And that is also canon destroying, because it retroactively destroys everything that Anakin went through, everything that Luke went through, everything that Yoda went through. It just throws all that out. Because Sabine is doing stuff in days, maybe weeks, that it normally takes years, months and years, maybe decades of training to get to. and she just gets there because she wants to. She just gets there because the plot requires her to, but it's ridiculous. And remember, it's just Sabine's power level that changed, not her as a character. How is she different at the end? This is what I'm talking about knowing how to write an arc, taking a character from something to something. Sabine can do more, and she's a Jedi Lorian, she's a Mando Jedi, she's a Jedi Mando, she's a girl boss, she's got her Mandalorian training, and now she got the Force too. Okay, who is she as a person? See, no longer about character. That's another characteristic of a girl boss. It's not about you becoming a better person. It's not about you even becoming a different person. You understand that? Who is Sabine at the end of the series? Same person she was when we met her. Who is Hera at the end of the series? Same person she was when we met her. There's no arcs. Stuff just happens because the plot requires it to, because the narrative says it should, because of girl boss powers, because of reasons. And your main character doesn't even have a noticeable arc. Okay, next reason. Also under the bait and switch was Ezra. When we meet him, he's force throwing people around. He's using, perhaps judo, samurai techniques, maybe aikido, maybe hapkido. He's dodging moves. He's using the force of the enemy's attack against him, against them, which you can find in judo and aikido and all that. Don't need a lightsaber. You keep the lightsaber. Woo, woo. Don't need a lightsaber. Woo, woo. I got this. You keep the lightsaber. Woo. Very next episode, what's he doing? Making a lightsaber. Lord, I can't with this lack of continuity, with this lack of plot logic. Jedalorian, I have to give credit for that. That's not mine. David Nemesis Howard came up with that with Nemesis FC2 on Twitter, so I got to give him credit for that. He's the one that came up with Jedalorian. I came up with something like Mando Jedi or Jedi Mando, but Jedalorian is pretty good. So, but, Ezra just all of a sudden completely changes his mind about, remember when Obi-Wan first introduces lightsabers to Luke in A New Hope, he said, it's a Jedi's weapon, it's your life. Cling to it. Lightsabers have a very special and unique place in the life of a Jedi, and now all of a sudden, I don't need it. Oh, well, I guess I'll make one. Psh, look at that. Put it together like it's nothing, like it's a toy, like it's, I don't know. It was just awful. Okay, next up, I talked about the individual characters, but what I'm going to talk about now is the overall story arc. I want you to think about what actually happens in the Ahsoka series. What actually happens is that the characters switch places, and that's really it. All the people that were where Ahsoka was going to look for Ezra and Thrawn are now where Ezra and Thrawn were, and Ezra and Thrawn and all of Thrawn's resources are now back in Dathomir, back in the main core systems. And that's really all that happened, if you think about it. If you just think about it, anything of significance, anything that's going to make a difference in future stories to come, that's all that happened with the Ahsoka series, is that the two casts of characters were in one place. They met when they found Thrawn and Ezra. They fought, Thrawn and them got away, and now Ahsoka and Sabine and the Force Ghost of Anakin are stuck in the far reaches of the galaxy. And so what? So what? At the end of the prequel trilogy, the Republic had fallen and the Empire had been created. And in Attack of the Clones, Palpatine had commissioned the Star Destroyers and the clone army. So at the end of Revenge of the Sith, Anakin Skywalker had given into the dark side, become Darth Vader, slaughtered children, killed most of the Jedi through Order 66. And we were a long way from where we were in Phantom Menace. From young Skywalker, we shall watch your career with great interest, to Anakin screaming no when Palpatine told him he killed Padme. We were a long way from that. In the original trilogy, okay, Luke is a farm boy with his eye toward the future, with his eye toward space, with his eye not on where he was. By the time we get to Return of the Jedi, Luke is confident. Luke helps destroy Jabba's whole situation with the help of Leia and the droids, Han, Chewie, and Lando. And he confronts Vader and beats him, but refuses to give in to his anger. And we're a long way from where we were when we met Luke. in the original trilogy where he's standing in front of the twin sons, realizing inside of himself he has a greater destiny than just being a moisture farmer. By the time we get to the Return of the Jedi, we see a lot of that destiny realized. And we see it again at the end of The Mandalorian season 2. So we see stages of progression with Luke Skywalker as a Jedi and as a person. When we first meet him, he's impatient, impulsive, and impetuous. We see him later, he's much more calm, much more in control of his emotions, much more realizing he can't give in to those dark emotions or he'll become his father. What happened in the Ahsoka series? They switch places and that's it. That's it. And to harken back to what I said about the girl boss thing, Thrawn was incompetent. See, if you don't know Thrawn and you don't know the Timothy Zahn novels and you didn't read when he was introduced, you won't have any idea who he's supposed to be. This guy, he had the cool, menacing demeanor, but he had the strategy, intelligence quotient of Sabine's ability to use the Force. Because Sabine Wren couldn't pull a candy bar out the wrapper with the Force. And Thrawn couldn't think his way out of a paper bag. And that is antithetical to who he is as a character. Thrawn is a strategist. Thrawn studies the art of different cultures to know how people think. So we see a glimpse of that at the end when he says to Ahsoka that I know your master was Anakin Skywalker, so I assumed you'd use his tactics. We see a glimpse of that. But Thrawn had Sabine in chains in jail. If he was going to kill her, why didn't he kill her then? Thrawn had intel on what Ezra was, so if he wanted to kill Ezra, why didn't he kill him then? And the biggest scene, I'm going to borrow a line from Aliens. Why don't we just take off and nuke the entire site from orbit? It's the only way to be sure. Thrawn had a Star Destroyer and he had hyperdrive. So you know what that meant? He could have just lifted off the planet and torched the planet and gone about his business. Now everybody on the planet dead. So what was his strategy? What was his point? What we wanted to see, which we will now never see, at least not with Ray Stevenson, rest in peace, is what Baylan was talking about. But if I'd written it, I would have written it differently. I would have written it so, see, the fights at the end were wrong. Ahsoka was fighting Morgan, but there was no real connection between the two of them. So the fight didn't have any stakes. Ahsoka should have been fighting Baylan and finally beat him the way Rocky finally beats his opponents in the final fight. He couldn't beat Clubber Lang at first, but he beats him at the end. Drago kills Apollo, but Rocky beats Drago at the end. You know, Rocky had a draw with Apollo in the first movie, but he comes back and beats him by 1 second in Rocky 2. Ahsoka should have had a rematch with Baylan and beaten him. And if she had beaten him, that would have been the emotional closure and payoff that we wanted and needed. And Sabine should have fought Shin. So I would have had those as the two final boss fights. Both Ahsoka and Sabine would have won, and then Baylan and Shin escaped, and then they go to their destinies that we showed at the end. But instead, we have Ahsoka fighting Morgan, which there are no stakes there, and then we have Sabine all of a sudden with all these extra skills. But I want you to notice something. Sabine's entire arc for the first part was about finding Ezra. When she found him, it was more like they were a couple people that had met 2 times at a Starbucks. It was very awkward and very emotionally flat. And then she force lifts him up into the ship, then turns around and goes back to help Ahsoka fight. Does that make any sense? That she was all about Ezra until she found him, and then she abandons him on Thrawn ship to go back and help Ahsoka fight. That didn't make any sense. That didn't make any sense. That didn't make any sense. And speaking of Ezra, how did Ezra get a shuttle off a Thrawn ship undetected? We know he knocked out the stormtrooper and took his clothes. We'll give you that one. How did he get the shuttle off of Thrawn ship undetected? How did Ezra know where the Alliance, the Rebellion, Hera and them, how did he know where they were? How did he get on their ship without being shot down? Why did he come off in full stormtrooper armor without taking off his helmet first? Just so we could have that big reveal? Why didn't we get a hug between Hera and Ezra? Why didn't we get any type of emotional closure? Why didn't we get to see any of the things that we wanted to see? Why? See, that, once again, that doesn't make any sense. If you want your audience to invest in your story, then they're going to want some kind of emotional payoff at story's end. And finally, the last reason I'm done with this is because this is utterly forgettable. You can quote Star Wars almost verbatim from memory. You can almost quote the whole movie. Okay, there are so many quotable lines in Empire. I got a bad feeling about this. Laugh it up, fuzzball. I'd sooner kiss a Wookiee. I can arrange that. He could use a good kiss. Who's scruffy looking? Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. He told me enough. He told me you killed him. No, I am your father. No, that's not true. That's impossible. Search your feelings. You know it to be true. On and on and on and on and on. Excuse me, sir. Might I inquire what's going on? I mean, on and on and on. This Ahsoka series and most of these TV series have been utterly forgettable. I literally can't remember a quotable or memorable line from Ahsoka from the series. I can't, right, memes. Okay, good. Now that's good. Cajun said the memes. That's good. That is what's memorable from the Ahsoka series is the memes. But I'm talking about the lines, the actual writing. It's utterly forgettable. Once you get to the end of the series, if we see what happens next, that'll be cool. But if we don't, that's cool too. Because it's utterly forgettable. Ahsoka did not become a different person. Sabine did not become a different person. Nobody became a different person. They got different skill levels or whatever, and they had a few adventures, but I mean, it's just utterly forgettable. So I'm done. I'm done. Now, me and my crew, Sloppy Spoilers crew, we did a broadcast, we did a pod on the trailer, and we were trying to decide if we were going to watch Ahsoka. And we said repeatedly we didn't want to get bait and switched again. We didn't want it to happen again. And sure enough, it happened again. And that's why I'm done. I'm not going through this again. Your entertainment is not supposed to cause you stress. Your entertainment is supposed to be entertaining. Even if it has a sad ending, even if it's a tearjerker, your entertainment is supposed to move you emotionally and you enjoy the experience. Your entertainment is not supposed to be causing you stress. And I'm not looking at a screen where I see no respect of canon, no respect of mythology, nothing but plot armor, girl bossiness, just, thing after thing after thing after thing that gets on my nerves to the point where when I was getting ready to review, when I was preparing for my review for the Sloppy Spoilers podcast, I started to get a headache because I was so tired. I was so tired of thinking about Ahsoka and thinking about how much of a nothing burger it was and how there was no emotional payoff and how things just happened. Like they said, this needs to happen now, this needs to happen, but there was nothing to build up to or to earn those scenes. They just happened because the plot needed them to. No, I'm done with that. I want some good stories. And the other thing is I'm working on my own announcement and I found out, you can watch a lot of content or you can make a lot of content, but you can't really do both. So I'm focusing on making my content, especially since I'm doing live signings, live autographs, live tourings back on the tour circuit. So, but I'm not, let me see. Now, Cajun says a good thing right here. Okay, from The Mandalorian, this is the way. That's the only thing that's quotable from these shows. Very, very good point. Very, very good point. And that's true. That is the most quotable line that I can think of out of all the shows, is that this is the way. That's a good one. But other than that, what is that, 4 or 5 shows? One line? Andor, Mando, Obi-Wan, Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka. We got one line out of all that. This is the way. So this is the way I say goodbye to this content, and they got what they wanted. They specifically wanted to alienate long-term Star Wars fans and pander to a very small number of fans that never really watch the content and don't really care anyway. So they took a franchise that literally had mass appeal. How many times do you think that happens where a franchise can have generational mass appeal across age lines, ethnic lines, color lines, geographical lines, and people across the world love it? And they turned it into a niche franchise to where you have to like all the things I listed today. You have to like inaccessibility. You have to like things being lethargic, girl boss, no canon, no respect for history and mythology, self-referential, bait and switches, and being utterly forgettable. You have to like all that to like Star Wars now, because that's what it is now. And I'm done. I'm out. I'm not doing this to myself anymore. I'm not supposed to be thinking about reviewing a show and be getting a headache when I'm thinking about preparing for the review. Don't need that kind of stress in my life, and you don't need it in yours either. And on that note, I will wrap this up. I just wanted to do a rant room about Ahsoka because I had a lot of stuff I wanted to say. And I know there are other people out there that feel the same way I do. And I know there are those that are going to jump on my timeline or whatever and talk about, you know, you don't know what you're talking about and how could you not see this? And I'm like, whatever. It's not a mass delusion. If it was just me saying these things, there could be some legitimacy to the idea that I'm seeing something that nobody else is seeing. But when you have a whole slew of people, a whole ton of people saying the same thing, it's not a mass delusion. It's not a mass delusion, okay? So they got what they wanted. They wanted to alienate the longtime fans and cater to a very small market of fans that didn't watch the material anyway, and they wanted to take a multi-billion-dollar franchise and turn it into a very small niche market. So congratulations, enjoy your success, because I'm out. All right, that's it. Thank you for joining me on this rant room. Thanks to those of you that are watching me live. Thanks to those of you that are going to watch the replay. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell, boom, so you know when I drop new content. I'll see you next week. Well, no, actually, I'm going to be at a show next week. So I'm going to, I think my lives next week will be some lives from the show because I'm going to be at a con next week, a Comic-Con. So I'll do some lives from there to let you know how it's going. All right. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. Have a good, great even rest of your day.